Thank you.
I'm being boxed in.
You are being boxed in. Okay. Are we on live stream? Good. Okay. Good morning, everybody. It's just after 10 and the inquiry is resumed. This is into an appeal made by Dido Property Limited against Buckinghamshire Council's decision to refuse planning permission for production space and supporting buildings for screen-based media and associated services at land adjacent to the A4155, Marlow Road and Westhorpe Farm Lane, Marlow. If there is anyone new today, which there are some new faces. My name's Katie MacDonald. I am a planning inspector and chartered town planner, and I am appointed by the Secretary of State to hold this inquiry. This is day number 7. Usual reminders, please. Mobile phones and other electronic devices switch to silent. I'll aim to break for lunch around 1 p.m. We'll have suitable mid-morning and mid-afternoon breaks. There's no fire drills planned, so if you do hear an alarm, it is real. The fire exit's just at the back of the room there where the sign is, or where you came in. Just go down the stairs and hang a left round to the riverside. Toilets are just on that corridor down there, and accessible toilets are behind me on this corridor. Up to yet, I've heard opening statements from the main parties. I've heard from numerous interested parties. I've heard from the appellant's master planner and scheme designer. I've had landscape evidence, and I've heard evidence from the Rule 6 parties on the topic of residential amenity, noise, and various other matters. Yesterday we held roundtable sessions on ecology and noise, and today we will start to hear the need evidence. We'll start with the council's witness first, followed by the Rule 6 parties witness after that. Just on the need evidence, aside from aspiring to be a Blue Peter presenter when I was growing up, I know very little about film studios, so can we just take me slowly through need evidence? I have read all the proofs and I've tried to read as much background material as I can, but it is new ground for me, as I'm sure it is for some other people as well. Maybe not Mr. Bird, who's done other things, potentially. You said you've done some film studios. So yeah, just can you bear that in mind when we're going through the evidence? Any procedural or housekeeping matters before we start? Nope. Okay. Then, Mr. Bird, would you like to start your examination in chief, and what core docs do you want me to have up, or are we going to run through them?
Clearly, obviously, have Mr. Fannon's proof and rebuttal, proof 940 and 940A. I think also have these core document 9.1 and 9.2, which are the Lambeth Smith Hampton reports appended to Mr. Fannon's evidence. If you could also have core document 8.6A, which is Mr. Michael Davis's proof, and it's the appendices, particularly the Knight Frank report.
Yeah.
We will go to. And I think probably core document 950, which was the estate strategy cabinet report relating to the Wickham studios.
So that was core document 950.
950.
Yeah, got it.
There may be others that we touch upon and dip into, but focus on those. Mr. Fannon, if I could formally introduce you to the inquiry, you're John Fannon, you're a town planning consultant. You're a member of the Royal Town Planning Institute. You have a Master's in Regional Urban Planning degree, a Master's of Science in Environmental Assessment and Management, and you've over 30 years professional experience, including with local planning authorities as Head of the Planning Service and Head of Development Management, and you've been undertaking planning consultancy work for Buckinghamshire Council for over 4 years, and you say you're familiar with the policy framework for decision making within the council, and you were the author of the officer report on the planning application considered and refused by the Council's Strategic Sites Committee, to which this appeal relates.
That's correct.
And you have at the end of your proof the witness declaration. And I'm going to go to section 7 of the proof, which is the need section. There's no separate need proof, and if we could have also the rebuttal proof, and the evidence will sit within the context of the need statement of common ground, which is core document 7/3. So we'll take that as the background. So if we go first to section 7, Mr. Fannon, we turn to the issue of need. And firstly, perhaps you could summarise the advice the council received from Lambeth Smith Hampton at application stage.
Inspector, so the council
commissioned Lambert Smith Hampton, an expert consultancy firm with experience of the film industry, to provide advice at the planning application stage. And their advice was that there's a lack of certainty regarding the need for studio space.
You may just need to get a bit
Can
closer
you hear me?
to the
How's the volume?
people here at the back. Yeah. That's
Yeah.
a tad closer.
Okay. Yeah, so at the planning application stage, the council commissioned Lambert Smith Hampton, a consultancy firm experienced in the property market and the film sector in particular, to provide expert advice in relation to the question of need for studio space. And that informed the officer assessment and recommendation to the committee. You will recall there was a deferral committee, and from September 23, and then the committee reconsidered in May 24. Lambert Smith Hampton provided an informal update at that point, effectively confirming nothing significant had changed since their original advice. But since this appeal was lodged, Lambert Smith Hampton have been asked and had provided an update to their consultancy report. And they advise us that it's inherently difficult to forecast future demand, noting that their complicating factors is the overall nature, the global nature of the industry, influenced by socioeconomic and political factors, as well as factors within the creative industry itself.
I think slow down a little, I think.
Okay. A particular issue was the actor and writers' strike between May and November 23, which they say had a very severe negative impact on production worldwide. And that a forecast for a bounce back in 2024 hasn't materialized. And they say the consequence of that is that studio occupation and performance in the UK has been poor. LSH advises that the implications of this situation is that all historical forecast models for the demand for studio space are effectively invalidated, and will be so until a new stabilized trend in production spend can be re-established.
Okay. Then let's look at the issue of the supply and pipeline supply, and here perhaps take up core document 902, which is the Lambert Smith Hampton report of December 2024, where they address in section 3.1 the existing supply, and then section 3.2 the pipeline supply, and you've relied upon their assessment in your main proof of evidence, which is at 7.3.
Lambert Smith Hampton advised that very few new developments have commenced since 2022. They have updated their, if you like, the existing supply from 4.1 to 5 million, recognizing schemes that have come forward. But their conclusion is that the conversion rates from pipeline are low in very recent years and likely to be lower now than they were 2 years ago. They have advised that the reason why the conversion rates are low is that there's concerns about demand, competing supply overhang, uncertainty around new business rates, construction inflation, all of which have made economic viability more challenging. They have, though, identified proposals that are more advanced than Marlow Film Studios, including Leavesden, Sunset Studios, Bray Studios, Sky Phase 2, Pinewood South expansion. I have drawn attention to the Knight Frank report, which is appended to Michael Davies' proof, because it seems to corroborate a lot of the analysis that Lambert Smith Hampton have provided to us, namely that over the last 5 years, stock has increased significantly faster than production spend, and that there was a great deal of new studio space added to the market in 2021, 2022.
Let's just pause there, and perhaps we can take up the Knight Frank report, which is core document 86A, and appended to Mr. Davis's proof. If we go to page 30 of that, 30, we can see, I think, in 2.5.7, which you have referred to, page 30, and then 2.5.8, the extent of the increase in new studio space in the period 2021 and 2022.
Indeed, so we can see from Knight Frank's analysis. Sorry, are we at 2.5? Yeah. We can see from Knight Frank's analysis they've looked at spend, and they've looked at existing studio space. They've identified, if you like, a peak spend, if you like, figure related to a known amount of studio space, and we can discern from that by Knight Frank's analysis that the utilization of existing capacity is around 42.6%. Now, this figure reflects quite closely other evidence that's out there, and I've referred to a report by Deloitte, which is core document 903, where they predicted that studio capacity in London and South East will be 50% in the near future. How the winds have changed, yeah.
Core document 9/3. And in terms of your 46% figure, we just go in the Knight Frank report to 2.5.26 on page 32. .26 on page 32 of the appendix. They identify a peak capacity utilization rate of 840,000 square feet per 1 billion, which they've adjusted for inflation to 712,000 square feet. And they then identify that as a result of the amount of floor space relative to production spend, that's risen to 1.67 million square feet in the year 2023-2024. How have you derived the percentage, the 46%?
Well, if 712,000 square feet represents the most efficient or full, if you like, utilization of existing space, and 1.67 million represents the spend, the known spend, you divide 712,000 square feet over 1.67 million, and you get 42.6%.
42.6.
So we have the, if you like, the floor area of 712,000 square feet over a spend of 1.67 million, and that represents, you know, that if you like, calculation comes out at 42.6%, which represents the amount of existing floor space that's actually been used. And they use this analysis later on to project demand. So I think it is, if you like, an analysis mechanism, but it is, I think, meaningful because they do actually use it to project demand.
And in terms of Lambert Smith Hampton's view of demand and supply going forward, take up 9/2 again. What is their advice? We go to section 4 on page 5.
Their advice is that there remains material uncertainty as to future demand, and they haven't given us a projection of future demand. The logic is that they don't believe you can calculate that at the moment, given the destabilization of the trend in spend over recent years. They don't say that there might never be a demand in the future, but it's uncertain at the moment, and not the time to predict what that might be. However, Knight Frank do undertake that analysis in their report, which is appended to Michael Davies' proof. And I've set out at table 3.21 of my rebuttal, if like a summary of their figures.
Let's just turn that up. And just in terms of these figures, these come from the Knight Frank report, and the reference to the Knight Frank report is paragraph 3.3.2 and 3.32, 3.3.4 on page 55.
That's correct, and I haven't done any maths here. I've just literally extracted the figures and put them into a table for presentation clarity. And you can see from the figures, they set out the existing pipeline of schemes in the UK, in the southeast and in the West London cluster. They've identified the ones which have planning permission or are under construction, and they've then also, if you like, exercised their judgment to identify the percentage of those which they believe are well placed or have a reasonable prospect of coming forward. And then what they've also done, using that sort of a spend to floor space basis, calculated floor space need or demand up until 2029. And you can quite clearly see that from their projected need, that the existing stock of studio space, the underutilized capacity we've talked about, around 50%, that part of the pipeline, which they believe is well placed or in has a reasonable prospect of coming forward, is more than sufficient to meet demand. To their prediction horizon, which is 2029.
Just from my understanding, and then so you're saying that the where the well placed reasonable prospect is that at 1.29, 1.3.
Yeah.
That figure is more than the need figure in the next column.
1.28, yes.
So that's not a residual need. That's just saying that's the need, but the actual reasonable prospect is already there.
Yes.
That's what you're saying. Right. Okay.
Yes.
Just so I understand that. That's
Let's put
Thank
that in
you.
the context of the Knight Frank report itself. We go to the Knight Frank report, page 58, paragraph 3.3.17. Says, based on this evaluation, so it's effectively the analysis preceding and including the table 10. It's estimated that 1.3 million square feet of stage space has a reasonable prospect of being delivered. And that's the 1.3 that you've included in your table.
That's correct. Yeah.
Then if we go over the page to 3.4.13 on page 60, was referenced to, I think, 1.29 million in that bottom paragraph. And it says, should this space come forward within the next 5 years, it may be sufficient to meet projected demand. Then adds the caveat that schemes can often take several years to come forward and developments are typically phased. And some current pipeline schemes could be delivered beyond the 5-year forecast horizon. Come back to some of those points in due course. And the conclusion you reach from that?
That there is there's no proven need for studio space now or up until Knight Frank's horizon. I do note that Mr. Davies in his proof makes an argument that Marlow Fullerton Studios should be approved because the pipeline isn't coming forward as it was predicted to. And while it's agreed that the pipeline by Lambert Smith Hampson advice hasn't materialized in the way they thought it would, it must be true that if the pipeline isn't come forward, that somehow speaks to the demand. The demand isn't there for it. So the corollary of the pipeline coming forward is that demand isn't there. So I think uncertainty over pipeline schemes is not an argument to add to the pipeline of competing oversupply. And I think there's an important point here because we've seen the consequences of competing oversupply, not only in the underutilization of existing capacity that's there, but in the context of the High Wycombe studios in particular. That's a core document you've been referred to, 950, where the council's cabinet report has agreed to allow the disposal of that film studios to become a data centre.
Let's just give the inspector a little bit of background in relation to Wickham.
So it's an established film studio. It's set up originally under permitted development rights, then got planning permission for expansion, but is now no longer considered to be viable. Another concern about adding to the competing oversupply is displacement of benefits, that you're not actually adding anything to the UK's in terms of the benefits to the film industry, you're just displacing activity from one place to another. I have noted in my evidence that the Rule 6 party, Mr. Kershaw, has cited evidence presented to the Culture, Media and Sport Parliamentary Select Committee into Film and High-End Television, March 2024.
This is, I think, 325 of your rebuttal, page 10.
Where leading industry figures have expressed confidence that Britain now has sufficient capacity to support demand and allow for sustainable growth. And indeed, the evidence to that committee was that the sort of limiting factor in relation to the growth of the industry is not actually studio space, it's skills and workforce. And in fact, this is an issue that's recognised government level, indeed local level. There are many initiatives in place to try and address this. We know that most of the larger studio developments have training initiatives. Even Marlow is offering, amongst other things, 60 training spaces per year, but we don't know whether this is actually going to be sufficient to actually address this critical limitation in supporting growth.
And thinking just in your rebuttal, please. Go to 329, you refer there to Mr. Sensicle's proof of evidence and the letter attached, Appendix C of his proof, which is a letter from CBRE Limited.
Mr. Sensicle, yeah, if you like, makes an argument that Marlow Film Studios will be viable as a development, and CBRE have provided a letter, and they say, you know, Marlow Film Studios will attract competitive attention from a wide variety of funding sources and investment capital once planning permission is confirmed. And I say, well, wouldn't this apply to a greater or lesser degree to the existing significant pipeline of schemes that exist? And why is an investment opportunity evidence of need? I don't believe it is.
Then let's look at critical mass, and here part of the context is also the alternative sites assessment, which we've agreed will be dealt with under the planning evidence as opposed to this section, but that's part of the context. But just in terms of critical mass, deal with this, I think, in paragraph 7.7 of your main proof. But again, if you could summarise the council's position. This is one of the issues we addressed at the planning application stage, and we asked Lambert Smith Hampton to advise us on. And their advice in relation to critical mass is that it is a significant factor, but critical mass, the benefits deriving from it, operate at the cluster level as well as an individual studio's level. So, you know, to get the benefits of critical mass, you know, they are derived from the West London cluster or any cluster, they're not just on a single scheme. And they think the greatest benefit of critical mass in relation to a single scheme is actually a benefit to the developer in terms of achieving economies of scale. We also know that there are some other advantages in terms of being able to fund, say, a bus service, for example, if you've got more economic activity and more workforce on site. I think you're speeding up again.
So okay.
Let's slow down.
So this question of critical mass, we looked at it in the context of the alternative sites assessment, and we've set out some observations on the alternative site assessment and its limitations. I will note that Mr. Pryor, in his evidence earlier in the inquiry, didn't provide any convincing argument why this particular size of scheme is necessary. And I don't think any of the other evidence need witnesses have provided any convincing arguments why this particular size of scheme is necessary. Looking at the issues around alternative sites assessment, including the fact that the BFI identifies a much larger area, a much larger geography comprising the effective sector where most of the activity occurs.
This is the West London cluster versus Metro London cluster issue.
Yeah, that's correct. And there's a graphic of that in my evidence, which I'm going to try. It's in the main proof. Yes, it's on page 46 under paragraph 818. Actually, sorry, I'd actually give you the reference to the officer report. It's also in my rebuttal, but I just pulled up the version in the officer report, which is a core document as well. And in my, so the graphic is in my proof of evidence is under paragraph 325 in my rebuttal proof of evidence. Sorry, yeah.
I don't think there is a graphic in your rebuttal. I think we need to go to the report committee.
Sorry, it's in my main evidence. Main evidence 325.
Right.
That's correct. Yes. So there you see there's a well, now the wider cluster wasn't known to us at the time the application was made, in fairness, but nonetheless, as a matter of fact, the BFI identify a much larger area of interest in terms of the focus of this industry. So my assessment of the evidence to the inquiry is that the appellant's real world proposal, they've described their proposal as a real world proposal, doesn't provide evidence that this scale of development in this location has any particular significance or advantage over the pipeline schemes.
Good. Ben can draw all the strands together and summarize your conclusion on the issue of need, please, Mr. Fannon.
Excuse me. So we know, as a matter of fact, that studio occupation and performance in the UK has been poor. We know that utilisation, whether you take Deloitte's view or Knight Frank's view, is around 50% of existing studio space capacity. We know there's an existing pipeline of studio space that's sufficient to meet demand. We know that there are unimplemented planning consents for similar scale developments. We know there's a lack of certainty, or we believe there's a lack of certainty on the advice we've been given as to the need for future space. And it's my view that there's insufficient evidence that need is an overriding material consideration to this inquiry. We haven't found the critical mass case to be convincing, or that there aren't other sites within the wider cluster, not on the green belt or on the grey belt, in a more sustainable location with less harmful impacts. But I will say, notwithstanding this uncertainty, I attribute significant weight to the economic benefits that the scheme potentially brings in recognition of the importance of economic growth and indeed the importance the government places on that.
Thank you very much. That's the evidence in chief.
Hello. Yeah, Mum. Thank you. That was quicker than you advertised.
The Fannon spoke a little bit quicker than I was
You
anticipating.
spoke a lot quicker than I was. You should see the amount of red lines under it. I will do that afterwards. Okay. Mr. White, are you ready to? I presume it's you cross-examining. I haven't actually asked.
Ma'am, your presumption is correct. It is me. It is me, and I'm not going to get into see how quickly we can speak competition with Mr. Fannon, because I know that's one thing I will lose. So, Mr. Fannon, what would help you? Would you like me to identify what we're going to go to now, or just identify it as we go along?
As we go along is fine.
Great, excellent. Right. Can I just start off? I'm going to give you a roadmap of what we are going to cover and what we're not going to cover. I'm not, as Mr. Bird has identified, to whet your appetite. I'm not going to deal with alternative sites. I'm also not going to do the planning balance and the last point you read out, the weight you give to economic benefits. I'm going to save that for 2 weeks. Yesterday, I think it is. You have the pleasure of returning. I'm also not going to deal with this point about about critical mass in the sense that, well, I'll touch on it a bit actually, but what I'm obviously going to fundamentally try and get to the bottom of is what the council's position is on need. And I also, in order to do that, can we just start off? You obviously, with your experience, because there is going to be the inspector's got reasonably diverse evidence on need from yourself, Mr. Kershaw will hear this afternoon, and obviously from the 5 witnesses called by the appellants. And I just, in the fairest way possible, just want to ask you about your experience with the film industry. Would you say it's fair that you are dependent pretty much on the 2 Lambert-Smith-Hampton reports?
That's reasonably fair. I will say that your own evidence has been extremely useful, which I've also looked at in some detail.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that's what I'm slightly surprised in the sense that you can understand now the material now, the cumulative weight of effectively Chodorovic, Neville, Waite, Davis, Knight, Frank and Evans. You've obviously seen a lot of evidence in the context of this appeal. And can I just ask, has that evidence in any way shifted the dial in the sense of, is your position on need, it's fair, I think, to characterize it as unproven? Is that what is that something I think you said to my learned friend, no proven need? Can the inspector record that is the position of Buck, that they take the position that after all the evidence and everything, no proven need?
Yes, that's fair.
Okay. We can accept, can't we, by definition, all need exercises by definition have a degree of uncertainty because by definition you're projecting into the future. That's inherent in the exercise, isn't it?
Yeah, that's fair. Yeah.
We also know, don't we? Can I just ask, in preparation for this inquiry, can you just tell the inspector, have you undertaken site visits to other studios?
No, I will say I am familiar with Pinewood because I've worked on planning applications for its development. I was the officer which recommended the expansion of Pinewood Studios, which was approved some years ago. So I have familiarity with that. I don't have great familiarity with other studios.
Well, wait, let's just so, but in the context of being the officer in Pinewood, did you go and visit Pinewood? Were you taken round?
I did, yes.
Yeah, fine. So you visited Pinewood, and just the chronology of, effectively there have been 3 main phases of Pinewood in a sense. It's historical evolution. There was then its formal extension with a planning permission granted by the Secretary of State. There was an appeal in the early, which I think Mr. Bird had the pleasure of representing Bucks. There was a public inquiry. Was it 2010, 11, something of that ilk? Maybe I'm
a bit later.
2014. There were 2, wasn't there? There was one in 2008 that was a refusal, as I recall, a refusal of a scheme in 2008, a more successful, but so they've actually been 4 phases. Regional historical evolution, the aborted attempt for an expansion in 2008, which was refused on appeal. Another appeal that Mr. Bird was party to, maybe Mr. Bird was in both appeals, but certainly one granted by the Secretary of State in 2014, which the inspector will see on her site visit. That's been implemented. And then, of course, there's the 4th phase, which is the unimplemented planning permission, which was granted, I think it was last year. Is that not right? And was that the one you were case officer on?
No, it was the SH UK, Screen Hub UK, the the expansion to the south, which hasn't,
which we can see on the ground. So the 2014 one.
no, later, it's unimplemented.
Okay,
Yeah.
fine. Okay, right. I think that was, yeah, that's what I meant with my first question. Fine. Now, can I also ask you, let's deal with some matters of agreement. And could you, first of all, could you take up Mr. Pryor's evidence? I know you've probably got it. CD 8.1. And for you and Mr. Bird and everyone else's interest, I would like to go to page 68. And Mr. Fannon, you there, sorry, because I don't.
Yeah, I'm
It's been-
working off a PDF, so
Fine.
it's
I hope it's
land use, is it?
land use plan, yeah, it's a
yeah.
plan. And I want to look at 3 things on this. Let's just start our journey on need by addressing what the scheme is for, because we note, and I think this is common ground, there's no dispute, obviously, as this is a factual matter. Can everyone hear? Is my speaker loud enough? And those at the back here? No. No? Can you hear?
Yeah, you can.
Yep, fine. Some reasons these speakers, you literally have to do a Mick Jagger to get them to work. That was as far as I was going to do a Mick Jagger, I can assure you. Well, I'm going to invite Mr. Bird out for a karaoke night now.
Can I punch?
Um,
All 3 parties of that.
I think Miss Neville would have the good sense to say no, probably. 512, there are 3 things. We can agree, can't we, that what is sought permission for 18 sound studios, and we've heard, and we sound stages, and we know, and we'll hear from Miss Waite particularly about the mechanics of what's done in those. We've got the 19 workshop buildings, which are obviously subsidiary and ancillary, but critical to the production of films. We've got the car parking, which is obviously to support those coming to work at the studios, the office accommodation, the back lot, which we can see the principal back lot of 20,682 square meters, which, as we've heard, is largely obviously open air. We've also got the internal back lot. Do you see identified in the west of the site with the moniker internal back lot? Do you see that?
I do.
We've got the entrance square, which is effectively where people will arrive, the cafes, reception, etc., the bike storage, the studio hub, which is the crescent-shaped building in the southeast of the site. We've got the Skills and Culture Academy, which is to the west of Westthorpe House in the kind of intermediate land between the film studios itself and the southern backlot. We've got the recreational space, we've got the communal building, etc., and we've got the mechanics of getting people around the site either by walking or driving. Now, we see the figures as we can see the total floor space it's not all built development, of course, because it includes the back lot, but roughly we're talking about a development around 1.7 million square feet, aren't we, broadly? Now, we can agree, can't we, both in your evidence and in the Lambert Smith Hampton, there is no contention by the council that in terms of mechanics that the proposal doesn't work. It won't do what it says on the tin.
That's correct.
Yeah. And it's right, isn't it, that there is an acceptance implicitly that by accepting that there is no challenge to what it does, that an inference can be made that it's no part of your case to challenge the quality of what is proposed.
That's correct.
Yeah. It's also right, isn't it, that we can argue about, and I think your exact words is you're not satisfied why this size is necessary. And of course, we'll hear evidence on that. But as far as I can see, I don't see any positive case put by you or Lambert Smith Hampton in a sense that it's excessive operationally, that there's any component within the proposal that frankly is not needed or unnecessary or superfluous, is there?
That's correct. Our issues around the site size relate to the fact that it's on green belt,
Okay.
and to do that you have to justify every square meter of it.
Well, we have a fundamental difference, and we'll come on to that luckily in 2 weeks about grey belt, green belt. But I also want, can we agree? I don't know, have you got a copy, please, of the main statement of common ground, which is CD 7.01? Could you take that up, please? And could you go when you found that, and will you tell me when you got there, please? Could we go to 5.3?
Okay.
Page 10 of 15 in the printed version.
I'm at 5.3.
Now, there are various things agreed, and you agreed that the provision of purpose-built studios of this scale is a significant economic opportunity given the scale of ambition the government is now advancing in respect of the TV/film sector. Now, we'll come on to look at the guidance in the MPPF, but we note the date of this was November 24. Would you agree that since you agreed that the government is now advancing in respect of the TV and film sector, that's now not advancing in a sense, it's concreted by para 86 that you heard me read out at length last Tuesday? And as I say, don't worry, we'll go to this, but now there is effectively identification of creative industries in the MPPF, isn't there?
There is, yeah.
And so can we agree that fairly, in the light of the MPPF, the government isn't now advancing, the government policy now is in respect of the TV and film sector, and we'll come on to look at it, but it's broadly one of support.
Indeed, yes.
Yeah. The next point, you acknowledge the proposal represents a significant investment in one of Buck's key economic sectors. Now, so we also get your agreement, and I don't think this is a matter of dispute between us, that in the context of planning policy and Buck's local policy, it is right to characterise the development as falling with the Venn diagram of a creative industry.
Agreed.
Thank you. And we can also agree, and I think that's probably what led you to 5.3 as an acceptance that it is one of Buck's key economic sectors.
Yes.
And we also note at 5.4 that the appellant's case of development will support the expansion of the West London cluster, while the council's position is it has the potential to do so. Now, I don't understand, to be honest, potential. Let's put aside need and demand. But in view of what you said about the qualitative provision and no criticism, I can't see, whatever the demand and supply position, having in the portfolio of film studios in the UK, I just simply can't understand why you do not accept the proposition it will support the expansion of the West London cluster. I can't see any harm that will be created by producing a state-of-the-art master plan proposal in the Western cluster in 2025.
Well, the harm would be the loss of a greenbelt site that wouldn't be properly justified.
No, that's a completely different point. In 5.4, what you are discussing solely is not the green belt. I'm not interested in the green belt for reasons that are clear for next week. But when we're talking about the expansion of the West London cluster, the appellant takes the view it will support, and you obviously thought about this and said it has the potential to do so. Now, all I'm putting to you, and it's a very simple point. I mean, I know in a statement of common ground, one's slightly terrified about what one's agreeing or not agreeing to, but I just can't believe if the sole consideration is the West London cluster and marrying that with your position on qualitative the qualitative provision. I simply don't understand
Well-
why you can't support and accept the proposition that this would support the expansion of the West London cluster for UK film production.
Well, I think it has a potential to do so if it's needed.
No, forget the riders, frankly. It's not a question. If something supports, I mean, you might, I don't know your domestic arrangements, but if you add 3 extra living rooms to your house, whether you have the need for those 3 extra living rooms, that would be a qualitative improvement to your house, wouldn't it?
In that scenario, yes.
And the same is true here. Put aside need, that's irrelevant to the point about supporting the West London cluster. The provision of 1.7 million square feet of a development that you say you have not a single criticism about its quality, I cannot see why you are struggling to say it would support, its provision would support the West London cluster.
Inspector, in my evidence, I have actually drawn attention to the consequences of contributing to oversupply, competing oversupply. I've made reference to the High Wycombe case where we have a studio being turned into a data center.
No.
We have also potentially issues around displacing benefits, and so that's, I think my use of words from the statement of common ground has the potential to do so is perfectly reasonable.
No, it doesn't, because no, forget, it's not an issue of demand and supply. And I'm going to come back to your point, what you draw, and Mr. Kershaw falls into this trap of what you seek to draw from High Wycombe. But all right, I've asked it twice, I'll ask it one final time. The provision, in your judgment, is any studio in the UK better qualitatively than Marlow?
I don't know that it is.
Thank you.
If I
then-
could
Sorry,
just
sorry.
clarify my answer. I think the key point here is, is it in the right location? I think that's a key consideration.
No, it's not what there's no debate between you and I actually think Mr. Kershaw and everyone, no one is seriously promoting a case that this studios will not be considered as part of the West London cluster.
No, that's correct.
So talking to an alien to put 1.7 million square feet of a proposal that you accept, none is better, must be a qualitative benefit to the West London cluster. If you provide the best, I mean, if you were saying the same, just let me finish. If you were saying the same, let's imagine I, in a moment of madness, were producing a £3 billion hotel for London that you said will be unquestionably the best. I can't see why you wouldn't take the view, well, clearly the London hotel market will be better because of that qualitative improvement.
I would say, well, if it was on a greenbelt site and stood empty after it was built, that wouldn't be a benefit.
Yeah, all right, but putting aside, no, we're not arguing about benefit. We're not, that's where you're falling. We're talking about this support. The words in 5.4 are very clear, supporting the expansion of the West London cluster.
That's only meaningful if the expansion is needed.
I'll leave that point. The inspector's got your judgment on it. Let's just deal with a couple of other matters, though. You will accept, will you not, when we consider need, there are effectively 3 points about need. There's the qualitative need, the quantitative need, and the perceptual need.
I don't know much about perceptual need.
Well,
but,
you might have, you or the market might perceive that there is a need for something else. Someone might have the view, the perception of the executive sitting in Los Angeles might be that what Britain is missing at the moment is a state-of-the-art new studio facility. Mightn't they?
Yes.
Yeah. And that's a perceptual need, irrespective of where qualitative or quantitative need sits.
Fair enough.
Now, let's also deal with your acceptance. In your rebuttal, you very readily accept, and I'm not going to delve into this in the context of planning policy and out of date, you'll be pleased to hear, but you do accept at 3.32 in your rebuttal. It's a very interesting commentary on this in the context of the development plan, which I'm going to set aside. But I think you note here at 3.32, in terms of effectively, there's nothing in the framework nor government or local policy and strategy that speaks to the need for any additional studio space in the southeast. Do you see that?
I do.
And I think also you have an acceptance, do you not, that at 3.32, the first line, while the development plan does not make specific provision for creative industries, we're in a position where, in terms of the 2019 development plan, your words, not ours, but that you accept the starting point is there's no specific provision for creative industries, don't you?
Correct.
And it's also right, isn't it? Prior, let's whether the 12th of December is a game changer, we'll come on to have a discussion about, but prior to the 12th of December, I mean, we know, do we not, that effectively there is no extant SBD dealing with creative industries in Bucks, is there?
No.
No. There is no, since the 12th of December, I haven't seen, and I'm not sure you have, has Bucks put in place any informal or formal policy, SBD, SBG, whatever may we call, that reacts to the changes in the MPPF to deal with creative industries?
No. I will say, Inspector, and this is dealt with in the Statement of Common Ground to a degree. There are a number of local strategies which do support the creative sector and the film industry in Bucks, and clearly they are material considerations in planning applications, and the council has approved film studio developments, Pinewood, High Wycombe.
But let's put this back in the framework that you and I understand of section 38.6 in the development plan and other material considerations. In terms of planning policy, you've agreed at 3.32, there's no policy that makes specific provision of creative industries.
Yes.
There's also no express informal or formal planning SBD that makes specific provision for the creative industries.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, where we are in terms of need, the only document that addresses it in terms of the planning system is the MPPF in the context of Bucks.
Yes, I agree with that. Yeah.
Yeah. And then let's just have a look at, please, the MPPF. Have you got a copy or have you got it on your computer? I don't think it's got a core document number.
I said it didn't need one.
Yeah. Okay.
I think we can all pull it off.
You'll be pleased to know, Mum, that all inspectors take a different view. Some say it should be 1.1, others say absolutely not. Everyone knows about it. And we are in a world where
That's the problem with inspectors.
Is it? Oh, apparently I'm completely wrong. It is CT 11.5. I better write that on. I bet that was Mr. Fraser contradicting you, Mum. Now, if we just look at this, let's start off, please, on page 5. We note, as you're very familiar, at para 8, what we are told by the government is achieving sustainable development means the planning system has 3 overarching objectives, does it not? And of course, which are interdependent, need to be pursued in mutually supportive ways. And we note A, an economic objective to help build a strong, responsive and competitive economy. So can we agree that that's not about maintaining the status quo, but to build something gives an inference of something in addition, doesn't it?
Yes.
And that something in addition should be a strong, responsive and competitive economy. Is that correct?
It is.
By ensuring that sufficient land of the right type is available in the right places. Now, I understand your health warning about Greenbelt, and we'll deal with that luckily in 2 weeks. But if one looks solely at what is being sought, the use, putting aside Greenbelt, I don't see any contention by the LPA that this site, with the agreed position it's in the Western Cluster, it's in the right place for the provision of a film studios, putting aside your provider about Greenbelt, isn't it?
That's true, but going back to the statement of common ground, there's nothing that tells us there's actually a shortage of film studio space in this location.
Well, we can't, don't worry, we're going to come on to that. But okay, subject to that, Ryder. And then we go on, you see, to page 24 and paras. Could I take you to paras 85 and 86 and 87? Because tell me when you've got there, please, Mr. Fannon.
I'm there.
You note, let's look at the heading, building a strong competitive economy. And we see the introduction to this section is that, and of course, we're not concerned with policies in a sense, but planning decisions should help create the conditions in which businesses can invest, expand and adapt. And significant way, I'm not going to trouble you with that because of course that we're going to discuss in 2 weeks, but I just note when a significant weight should be placed on the need to support economic growth and productivity, taking into account both local business needs and wider opportunities for development. The approach taken should allow each area to build on its strengths, counter any weaknesses and address the challenges of the future. Now we know, don't we, that Bucks, I mean, I think there's ready acceptance that in Bucks, the creative industries are one of its strengths. Obviously, you've got the biggest, Pinewood, the second biggest film studios in the UK is here, isn't it?
Yes.
And would you readily accept that the strength of the Buckinghamshire economy? I mean, we could look at the Bucks economy, CD 5.15. We could look at that. There's acknowledgement, isn't there? Creative industries are important to Bucks.
Indeed.
In 86, planning policy should, and of course we note, have regard to the National Industrial Strategy at A, and at C, pay particular regard to facilitating development to meet the needs of a modern economy. Do you see that?
I do.
And we note under little a and footnote 43, having regard to the National Industrial Strategy, what is said in Invest 2035, the UK's modern industrial strategy, identifies priority sectors for growth and support. Now, do you accept a priority means that you give preference or priority to that sector over another sector? You've got favoured status, effectively.
I can accept that, yeah.
And one of the industries that we are concerned about has clearly got that, is considered a priority sector because it's the creative industries, isn't it?
It is.
And we note fundamentally, and this is probably a traversing slightly invariably 2 weeks' time, but little e, be flexible enough to accommodate needs not anticipated in the plan. I mean, we can agree, can't we? This magnificent tome, I don't know if Mr. Bird was involved in it, but it's nearly 400 pages. The Wickham local plan, as we've agreed, simply makes no provision for the creative industries, does it?
No.
No.
It makes provision for economic growth, but not
Yes.
specifically for the creative industry.
Then in 87, we note that planning decisions should recognise and address the specific locational requirements of different sectors. These includes making provision for, little a, creative industries. So planning decisions should make provision for creative industries. Now, I'm going to say, put to you, this is a game changer, because what we've got from you is effectively this scepticism, no proven need. And I'm putting to you that, Mr. Fannon, your evidence is out of date because the government's moved on to the next stage, which is to assume need. It doesn't take your position of scepticism and prove it, and LSH say you haven't proven it, which I rely on. Making provision for something, what do you think that means? Making provision for creative industries through planning decisions. In your judgment, what does that mean when you seek to make a planning decision that makes provision for a creative industry? Does that mean provide nothing, provide something, assume you should provide something? What's your judgment on that, please?
I accept the policy supports in broad terms the creative industry, and I'm not going to argue against that in any way. But I would just remind the Inspector, the Council's position is to take into account a number of factors in coming to a planning judgment. We've recognised the significance and importance of the policy and the promotion of growth and indeed the creative industry. We take no issue with that at all. It's absolutely clear, and that's why we've attributed significant weight in the planning balance.
No, Mr. Fannon, I'm not asking you what you've done. I'm sorry. Just go back to the question. I want your judgment. The inspector has got the clearest injunction in policy from the government that planning decisions should recognise and address the specific locational requirements. This includes making provision. If your partner says to you, make provision in the boot for my suitcase, what do? You make space for something to be added, don't you? Is that fair?
You might do, but what I will say, the council has made provision for the film industry in improving other schemes. And
No.
indeed, this policy doesn't say make provision anywhere at any cost. I think the key question is it the right location?
No, it's not. It's not the key question because you're answering a completely different question to answer. I'm not interested in action. This isn't a self-justification of the council. I'm not asking you whether you've complied with that policy. The question's very simple. I'm actually helping you, in the immortal words of one of my clerks, help me, help you, help the inspector. Because what I'm asking you, when the inspector reads, this includes making provision, I want the Fannon interpretation. What do you say making provision for creative industry means in the planning system when you're making planning decisions? What do you say it means, please?
It certainly means taking this into account in considering a planning application,
Well, Mr. Fannon,
which we've done. That's the,
I haven't put to you, but you have turned, just let me finish because you've given your answer. You turned one of the key parts of the MPPF into meaningless dirge, with the greatest respect. Taking something into account is meaningless. When you are required, if that is how you interpret it, no wonder this is the destination we've got to, because I'm putting to you, making provision means taking an active step to do something. Do you not agree?
I do agree with that, yes. But I will say that when a planning application is presented to a planning authority, they have to weigh up and balance all considerations, not just this one.
Of course they do. But when you have this, the MPPF guidance of December 2024 could not be hotter off the press or more up to date, could it?
Indeed.
Yeah. I imagine you don't live in an igloo and you followed the news this week. Have you?
Yeah.
And I just want to,
in between sessions of the inquiry.
yes, of course. And do you think what's been said, for example, by the Chancellor of the Exchequer yesterday and talking about the growth agenda, in your judgment, is that compatible or incompatible with Para 87, making provision for those groups of industries identified at little a?
Yes.
Yeah. And thank you. Okay. Now, next point. Let's now deal with, please, LSH. Because we can agree, can't we? We've got two documents before us. The council sought advice in December 22, CD 9.1, and they sought advice in December 24, 9.2. Correct?
Yeah.
Now, let's be fair, the second version, the December 2024 version, was disclosed in your proof of evidence. No criticism, but that's when the world saw that advice, didn't they?
That's when we got the advice.
Yeah. But yeah, no criticism. I'm not accusing you of bearing it in any shape or form. But the key point is that LSH advice in the chronology has not benefited. LSH as consultants have not had the benefit of seeing any of the appellant's evidence, have they?
Agreed.
Yeah. Next point. Did you ask, because I'm very interested in this, and you don't address this, but I'm going to ask you, why did you ask? I mean, we see this at the top of page 2 of the report. Bucks County Council have requested we update our views. We know that this inquiry was fixed in September 24. Between September 24 and December 24, did you ask LSH to give evidence at this inquiry?
I think we contacted them to ascertain their ability to support us.
Yes, well, that's a very strange phrase I'm going to put to you, and it might be a contention that's wrong, but I'm going to put to you that what actually happened is you, of course, understood the importance of need at this inquiry. You asked LSH to give evidence, and LSH declined to give evidence at this inquiry.
That's not quite true. No. They
Okay,
didn't.
well, tell me what I've got wrong.
No, there was a discussion about it. I will say one of the key concerns of the council was resourcing and paying for it. And
Well, wait, that's very important.
Yeah.
Let's just, in the scheme of things, we've got the largest film studios in Britain coming forward. And the reason you're telling the inspector, one of the reasons why the inspector has not got a view on need expressed orally at this inquiry is because Bucks didn't spend the money on getting a consultant here to give a view. Is that what you're saying, Mr. Fannon?
no, the council took a decision, and the factors that informed that decision were what we knew about need, the position we'd reached at the planning committee in May 2004, what we understood to be any changes that would have happened in the context of a need consideration, and we took the view that an update report from LSH would support the inquiry, and was the efficient thing for the council to do and commission.
Well, I'm going to put to you, and think very carefully about your answer. I'm going to put to you that the council did ask LSH to give evidence at this inquiry, and they declined, amongst other factors, but that happened.
It did not.
Okay.
Can you tell me exactly what did happen then? Because I'm just getting a bit of a mixed story right now, and I like things to be very clear.
The LSH never declined to give evidence. They did require a fee which the council wasn't able to meet.
So I go back to my point, Mr. Fannon. This is a remarkably large development. So where we are, in essence, is at best the only evidence that the statutory planning authority can offer the inspector and the Secretary of State is a written report which predates the submission of all the evidence by the appellant on need at this inquiry.
That's true, but I would say we had the benefit of a planning application that was being considered over a number of years, that had a number of economic reports supporting it, and a number of reports the council commissioned to consider that evidence. So there was a background context which enabled us to, if you like, to come to a view on how we would support the issue of need at the inquiry.
Well, let me ask you this: you've now had the benefit of reading the famous five evidence on need and economic benefits. Is it your judgment that that evidence adds to the debate or doesn't add to the debate?
Well, to be honest with you,
No, but that's the only thing you're required to do,
indeed.
Mr. Fannon.
You know,
Surprisingly enough.
what surprised me about the balance of your evidence is how it corroborated the council's position in relation to the analysis of need.
Okay, all right, we'll have a look at that in a moment, but let's just have a look, because I'm going to say that actually, I'm going to put to you that LSH should actually be on our side, because when you look at what they say, we've obviously got let's look at the update in relation to December 2024, CD 9.2, please. And let's again just get the chronology right. At one, introduction. Is the chronology right that following our report in December 22, Bucks have requested we update our views? Was that request to update our views post Bucks turning down the LSH fee quote, or before that?
Sorry, where are you reading?
I'm reading introduction, further to our report, introduction.
Yes, sorry, yeah.
Bucks County Council requested that we update our views, and just to make the inspector absolutely clear, was the chronology in the lead up to the inquiry, you obviously thought about instructing LSH. We then had the fee issue which precluded their instruction at this inquiry, and then post that you went back and said, well, could we have kind of It's a bit like with a car wash, you get the gold service, the silver service and the bronze service. You went back and asked for the bronze service, i.e. a 4-page written report.
Something like that.
Okay. And what have requested? What was the form of the request? Did you write a request to SLH? Because it's noteworthy. It's not paraded in the evidence. We don't. All it said is update our views on the following areas. Was that an email? Was that an oral phone call? Can you recall, Mr. Fannon?
There was a number of phone calls, there was an email exchange, and there was a contractual arrangement.
Okay. Then we look at this. Let's just on various points. Demand. You see various points is made. They say it's inherently difficult to forecast future studio demand. Do you see that?
Yeah.
Well, if that be right, is that something you agree with? Do you think from your understanding of studio demand, is that, and do you have some sympathy or do you agree that it's inherently difficult?
Clearly you can project demand, and Knight Frank have done that, and I've cited their figures. I accept LSH's advice that it's a very uncertain world we're in at the moment in relation. So if you predict demand, I think that you can't necessarily have a lot of confidence in your predictions.
No, but I want to go back to the question. Your evidence, do you agree with the proposition that LSH put that it is inherently difficult to forecast future studio demand or not?
At the moment, yes.
Okay, at the moment. So we're in a world, if that be right, and the inspector will form a judgment, that proposition will be true whether you're Marlow, Pinewood Free, Shepperton Free, anywhere. Any planning consideration of a new studio floor space would be subject to that rider, that it's inherently difficult to forecast future studio demand.
Inspector, that's made in the context of just post the actors and writers strike and the very severe impact on production. That's the context which that judgment is reached. It is.
No, you're completely wrong, Mr. Fannon, I'm afraid. As we made clear in our last report, December 22, pre the Screen Actors Guild strike, pre the Writers Guild strike, both which occurred in 23. You're wrong about that. But let's go back to what they say. The point I was dealing with you, and before you went off on a tangent, is if it be right, and you endorse it, that it's inherently difficult to forecast future studio demand, that has to be read then in the context of para 87 and making provision that any inquiry into future studio space, if you take the LSH judgment, which you've endorsed, would mean it's inherently difficult to forecast future studio demand. That's your position, isn't it?
That's the advice we got. I think it's a reasonable advice.
Exactly. You've agreed with that. So in a sense, the council's position is a universal one, whether it be Marlow, any proposal, High Wycombe, Pinewood, anywhere else, the council would take the view on need. Their position of scepticism, no proven need, would always be the Pavlovian response in a world where you take the planning judgment endorsed by LSH that's inherently difficult to forecast future studio demand. You'd never be satisfied.
No, that's not a fair reflection of what's actually happened. In the committee reports to the Strategic Sites Committee when this application was considered and rejected, there was a detailed analysis of need projection, and indeed LSH made projections of future need, so it was certainly taken into account. The point I'm trying to make is that, of course, sorry,
I'm not asking that.
The point I'm trying to make is that, of course, we do take need projections into account. The point I'm making is that now we're in a particularly uncertain time because of the destabilization in the trends in spend.
Mr. Fannon, I'm not interested. I'm not asking you about this. You've suddenly, in the last 10 minutes, for some reason, I don't know why, you're completely not listening to my questions. I'm not asking you about what you've done. I'm putting to you the proposition, which is very fair, that you and LSH tell the Secretary of State and the Inspector it's inherently difficult to forecast future studio demand. That you agreed to that. So I'm putting to you, just let me finish. I'm putting to you, that would always be the case. If you take that view, for the reasons as we made clear in our last reports. It's got nothing to do with the SAG strike and the Writers Guild strike. If you take that view, any film studios in Bucks that's considered by John Fannon would come up against that roadblock, irrespective of whatever evidence you put in, wouldn't it?
Well,
or do you take the view, just let
no.
me finish the question, or do you take the view, which is that it's only inherently difficult in relation to certain applications?
I take the view that there is certainly difficulty making any prediction, but it doesn't preclude us from taking predictions into account. The simple point of the matter is that we're in a particular time now where there's even more uncertainty about making predictions.
No. We'll come on to look at that in a moment. And then we see there is this fallacy I'm going to put to you in the third paragraph. The impact of the actors and writers strike in the US had a severe negative impact on production worldwide. Full stop. The forecasts for a bounce back in production in 2024 have not materialized. Now, let's look at the graph below. 2 points. That point is absolutely wrong. Bounce back in production. Tell me which way the arrow goes. In 2023, is the arrow going up or down? What's happened in 24? Is it up or down?
The graph shows it going up.
Thank you. Second thing, have you spotted the fundamental error in the summary chart?
Tell me.
I will. 2000, do you notice the chart is entitled UK spend on film and HETV projects Q1 to Q3? Do you see that? 2015 to 24.
Yeah.
Take up the Knight Frank report, please. Page 20. And frankly, both Knight Frank and LSH, not unsurprisingly, are both using the BFI. Do you see source BFI on page 2, page 20, source BFI? Do you see that?
Mm-hmm.
Effectively, apart from the year, Knight Frank start their table at 216, LSH 215. Now, this is titled, can we agree, Q1 2015 and 24. Do you see that?
On the table.
Yeah, on the SH table, Q1 to Q3 2015-24. Do you see that?
Actually, I don't at the moment.
On the heading, UK spend in bold at the top. Are you in Lambert Smith, page 2?
I thought you were pointing me to Knight Frank.
I am as well. We're going to go look at
So,
both.
so at the moment we're in Lambert Smith Hampton.
Yeah.
Is that correct?
Yeah.
Bear with me. And it's page
2.
Yes.
Try and keep that. Have you got the ability to look at two things simultaneously?
No, I have to flick from one to
Okay,
the
well,
other.
that's
So
a good point, and thank you for telling me. Lambert Smith Hampton report, can we accept their table in bold says UK spend on film and HEV TV projects, Q1 to Q3, 15 to 24.
yes,
Is that a fair inference that what that table shows is only the figures for the first 3 quarters of each annual year?
that's what you would expect from the title. Yes.
Exactly. Look at 2023. Do you see a figure total of 4 billion, which is 1.4 billion film, 2.6 billion HETV? Do you see that?
Yes.
Go to then Knight Frank, page 20, 2023. What figure do you get for the whole year?
Are we looking at the table?
Yeah, the table.
Sorry. Where's the year?
It's the year, it's second last column, 2023. You see, just above over 4 billion.
Sorry, I think I might be slightly at cross purposes in the document I'm looking at. So this is Knight Frank, page 20. Is that correct?
Yeah, it looks. I think I'm on the right one.
Actually, no, I'm not on the right one. I think I'm actually in Michael Davis' proof.
Yeah, that's where you should be. So it's PDF page 67.
Yeah, I was in the Michael Davis part, not the Knight Frank part. Forgive me.
Got you.
So 67, you say?
Actually, to be fair, if we look at 2.36, they do say, and it might be, maybe I'm unfair for Knight Frank. They say these figures suggest positive projections reflecting a 17.5% increase from the 4 billion recorded in Q1, Q3 2023 and a 10% uplift on the full year 23. It doesn't, let's imagine that I'm completely wrong and Knight Frank right. 2023, to accept the total across those 3 quarters was 4 billion
2020.
On the LHS.
on both frankly. They should say exactly the same because they're both using British Film Institute.
Well, you'd expect them to be the same.
Yeah, but can we just focus on the number? We've got 4 billion in 23, 4.7 billion in 2024. When something increases by 700 million, what percentage increase roughly? I think it's a 17.5% increase. So what we know in 2024, there's a 17.5% increase, isn't there, in the effectively UK spend on film and HETVs? Is that right?
That's what the graph
Yeah.
communicates.
Well, I'm sorry. I mean, I'm sure Mr. Bird and I would take the view if either of our respective chambers had growth of 17% in a year, we wouldn't be writing a report that's saying effectively the bounce back has not materialized when you've got a 17% improvement on the previous year. I mean, this point, well, we've got 2 points. 2024 is showing it's extremely healthy, isn't it? Isn't it?
Well, it's shown improving, certainly, yeah.
Yeah, and improve exactly. And to say, as LSH do, that the studio occupation and performance UK wide has been poor is completely unjustified on the figures. If you're showing a 17% improvement on the year before, how that can be described as poor? It's perverse conclusion, isn't it, Mr. Fannon?
If I'm not mistaken, other commentators have made reference to this fact that the consequences of the strike has had a negative impact on production spend.
We agree on that. I'm not putting that to you. Unquestionably, anyone can see in 2023, the drop from 22 to 23 was highly material, 5.6 to 4.
Mm-hmm.
Unquestionably, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the idea that there hasn't been a bounce back and the UK performance has been poor is a nonsense on the figures. When you're talking about a 17% increase, to describe that as poor is just completely perverse, isn't it?
It may be, but I think looking at
Maybe.
the context, they said the expected bounce back didn't.
And the next point we make, also, let's have a look into history. And this idea, and you fall into this trap as well, the idea we're in some kind of a crisis. 2024, the first 3 quarters alone, if it ended at the end of the 3rd quarter, it's the 3rd best year in the history of British film, isn't it? Just those 3 quarters. Look at the figures. Look at the figures for 22, 5.6, 21, best ever, 5.7. 2024, where does the 4.7 million sit in the past 10 years?
Pretty high.
Is it 3rd?
Could be.
Yeah, could
Yeah,
be.
yeah.
And unless you tell me prior to 2015, the British film industry was earning more, which I think from the historic graphs that are variously contained. 3rd best year, the inspectors, the context of the latest figures, and we might, if we're lucky, and during this inquiry, get the complete picture. The BFI might help us all by producing the whole fixtures. But at the moment, the reality is we're in the 3rd best year in history for the amount of money spent on film and HETV projects. Is that correct, Mr. Fannon?
Yes, apparently.
So to say the UK performance has been poor, again, in the context of history, to describe the 3rd best year and only have 75% of the year, and you're still at the 3rd best, is remarkable, isn't it? It's not poor, it's remarkable to be the 3rd best in history.
I do believe that the poor was in reference to previous performance, recognizing there was a negative impact.
But Mr. Fannon, we know what happened in 2023, even on from your planning perspective, that was abnormal, wasn't it? The writer's
Yes,
strike
yeah.
was abnormal. We go on, please. Could you go on to Knight Frank, page 34, please? 2.5.41.
There.
We note 4.7 billion for 2024, the first 3 quarters, but then they do the exercise, annualized total of 6.27 billion. Do you see that?
Mm-hmm.
That annualized total would mean that this year that we've just had passed would be the biggest year in British film history, would it not, for production spend on HGTV and film?
I don't know that, but I'm happy to run with it.
Well, you've got no reason to contradict. Then we
No, I
go
don't.
on and actually say, we note the BFI figures were subject to continuous revision. An allowance must be made for amendments. The 21 figures were revised from an initial figure of 6.27 billion to 7 billion in February 24, an upward revision of 12.6. Given this likely upward revision, we would assume the same production spend figure for 24, 7.06 billion. Now, of course, that's a forecast based on a past estimate. But in whatever way we do it, when the annualized year total of 2024, we know as a minimum will be the 3rd best year in history. It might be the 2nd, it might be the 1st. That's the only category. It's a bit like Champions League qualifying.
Indeed, I've no issue with Knight Frank's
No,
advice.
but I just want to put this in context. But the advice you received and the council, more importantly, received in December, and the advice you were telling the Secretary of State and the inspector was that the performance UK-wide has been poor. And fairly, if you're at least in your 3rd best year in history, to use the adjective poor is not fair, is it?
On its own, no, but there was some context to that.
Well, we then go on and look into the future. And we notice this, the implication of this, we see that all historical forecast models for future demand are now effectively invalidated until a new stabilised trend in production spend can be re-established. We suspect our previous forecasts, which were on the cautious side of the range of commentators' forecasts, will prove to be broadly correct. But at this stage, material and significantly increased uncertainty remains.
Sorry. Where
Sorry, I'm
were you reading from
page,
then?
Page 3, I'm sorry, ma'am, page 3 of LSH.
Back to LSH, right, thank you.
Yes, sorry. I know we're banning Knight Frank LSH. I know Gerald Eve hit the dust this week and was got another anonymous name. I shouldn't say that. But let's look at page 3. Despite the uncertainty, we are optimistic about the prospects for recovery in 25. Now, if an anecdotal feedback from most studios reporting strong bookings well in advance, we are also very positive about the prospects of the UK to increase their share of global production spend. So there are 2 critical points here, Mr. Fannon. If we use the 2024 figures, which you've accepted as a minimum must be the 3rd best year in history, your advice from LSH is optimism about prospects. That an inference is that 2025 will be better than 2024. Is that fair?
That's fair.
We are also very prospects of the UK to increase their share of global production spend.
Yes.
So the amount invested in Britain, LSH take the view that the existing figure is likely to increase. By definition, if you increase your share of a global production figure, you're going to have a bigger amount spent, aren't you?
Yes.
Yeah. So can we agree, when one looks, frankly, when one looks at LSH, and we've done 3 things, when one looks at demand, we acknowledge existing is at least the 3rd best year. They assume they are optimistic about the future 25. They make the judgment that 25 will be better than at least the 3rd best year. And thirdly, they take the view that the prospects for the UK to increase their share of global production are very, very positive.
That's what they say.
Yeah. And I'm going to put to you in that context, the advice the council has and what effectively you're telling the Secretary of State is one of remarkable optimism about the demand for film and TV studio space in the immediate future. That's fair, isn't it?
They do express a positive outlook, but what they clearly say is they're uncertain as to when there will be actually a need for future space, given the fact that we have an existing underused stock and we have a significant pipeline. That's the issue.
No, well, it's the issue we're going to come on to after our break. But before we finish this off, I don't think, I'm afraid, I've got an answer to my question. When you look at those three factors, how well we did in 24, their prediction for 25, both in terms of very optimistic and the increase of global production, putting those three factors together, the clear conclusion can be reached in terms of demand that the immediate future is incredibly rosy, isn't it?
That they certainly paint a positive outlook, yes.
Thank you. Ma'am, that might be a good moment to have our break, frankly, as I'm now going to move on to supply. And my estimate probably is I'm another half hour, 5 minutes.
Okay,
I think I've been an hour so far.
you have.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll take 20 minutes. Well, just under. We'll come back at 10 to 12. Is that okay with everybody? Yep. Okay, we're adjourned until then. Thank you. And don't speak to anybody. Thanks. Okay, everybody, it's 10 to 12, so the inquiry is resumed. Mr. White, would you like to continue your cross-examination, please?
Mr. Fannon, just a couple more points, please, on need, demand before we move on to supply. Could you again take up the LSH report? And it was just the point 3 that we see about prospects for the UK, very positive about the prospects. Could you take up the Knight Frank report, please? And look at page 40. And actually, let's start on 39 just for a moment. Actually, I'm sorry, I keep on finding other references I like. Could we go to page 38 and 2.5.76 just behind?
And there you
And do you see 2.576? Looking at global box office receipts and UK film production spend, we can see an upward trend in the UK's market share. In 2003, the UK had a 7% share of the market, compared with 23% in 2023. If the UK was to continue on this growth trajectory and to continue to grow market share, it would mean that forecasts pinned to global growth would fall short of the UK production spend figures. And then if you go over the page, so can we agree two things? That we see this Knight Frank Research BFI, over the past 22 years, the growth in market share has been quite remarkable, hasn't it? From a low on this graph of just under, I think it was 6% in 2009, that's the lowest. And then the joint highest, 2015 and 19, heady sites of just below 25%. Latest figures 2023, 22.7%, something like that, or 22.5%. Do you see that?
go.
I mean, the fact is we can characterize the last 22 years, there has been a remarkable growth and increase in the share of global cinema receipts versus UK film production expenditure, hasn't there?
Yes.
Yeah. And the next thing, just while you've got that open, go across to page 40. Now, we see obviously the blip of 23, but then we see in 24, you remember that earlier figure I took to you about the 7.06? And it looks, what's going to happen? Let's look across the next 5 years predicted by Knight Frank. And we note that the overall spend on film in the UK goes from a figure in 2024 of just over 7 billion to 9.3 billion. Do you see that?
I do.
So in the next 5 years, the market is going to effectively grow by over, well, 2.3 billion pounds, isn't it?
That's what Knight Frank are
That's
projecting.
yes, but it's noteworthy, isn't it, that the only other evidence, I'm putting Mr. Kershaw aside because we'll have the pleasure of his company this afternoon, but the only other evidence on the future is the one from Lambert Smith Hampton, who are very positive about the prospects for the UK to increase their share of global production spend. I mean, the inspector can note that there is a consistency on the forecasts between LSH and Knight Frank, isn't there, about the future?
To a degree, indeed.
Yeah, well, to a degree, there's no other evidence. No one has produced evidence that shows a decline.
Agreed.
Thank you. So we can agree that on the estimates, and of course by definition they're estimates, the future shows growth. The market in film spend and HETV production shows not just increase, significant growth to 9.33 billion in 2029, doesn't it?
That's what it shows.
Yeah. And also, before we We also note it's 2.584. Now, LSH don't do this exercise of telling the Inspector or the Secretary of State what would be required as a result of that growth in expenditure in terms of floor space. So the figure that Knight Frank have got at 2.584 is it would require effectively 2.5 million square feet when calculated using either the average 5-year or 10-year capacity utilization rates, which are over the page, aren't they?
Yes.
On page 41, we show the increase required. And just for the inspector's benefit, to save you doing the exercise that took me about 10 minutes, which was to try and work out the difference between those two graphs. And one of them, the top one, is not adjusted for inflation. The bottom one is adjusted for inflation. Do you agree with that, Mr. Fannon?
Yes.
Well, that's my contention anyway, and no doubt I will be told if I'm wrong, but that's my understanding of the difference. But on any basis, what it shows with the projected production spend figures, whether you adjust for inflation or don't, we're talking about a very considerable need for additional floor space in the next 5 years, aren't we?
It's showing growth. The question is there enough pipeline to accommodate it?
Yeah,
Which
well,
there is, yeah.
Well, I know that's your contention, and you'll be pleased to know we're about to come on to that figure, frankly.
Yeah, but the question is there sufficient pipeline to accommodate that growth?
Now, can we look at the supply? Have you got a copy of my opening speech, which is ID 1, as I recall?
Documents. It's like, actually, sorry.
Do you recall I did a table effectively showing the various Appendix 4, final page of ID 1, page 26.
Yes.
Now let's just look at. You will note both Knight Frank and Mr. Davis, who will hear evidence on. Well, Mr. Davis, we will in relation to. Do you accept the qualitative judgment about floor space that different sectors of the market will be interested in different provision?
Yes.
Yeah. So let's look at existing the UK studios. Can we agree various things? Firstly, Pinewood, which you know well. Effectively, it is got 30 stages currently, sound stages, and effectively what we have there is there's a master lease in place, isn't there, for Disney and Lucasfilms. Effectively, Disney have a master lease till 2029.
As I understand.
Yeah, and would you accept broadly that effectively that master lease, unless it's got very strange terms, Disney effectively have first say on utilization of the studios? A master lease gives them certainty that they're the first ones, they're offered first, so to speak.
That makes sense.
Yeah. We also know, do we not, Shepperton, owned by the same, Shepperton and Pinewood have the same ownership, don't they? And in relation to Shepperton, not Disney this time, but the master lease is to Amazon and Netflix, isn't it?
And yes, I understand that.
Yes.
The case.
And again, unless the master lease is peculiar or perverse, Amazon and Netflix will effectively first say on the utilization of the sound stages and other infrastructure at those studios.
Inspector, I don't have any detailed knowledge of these leases, but I'm perfectly happy to accept Mr. White's contention.
Well, we'll hear evidence on it, but you, Mr. Fannon, have obviously been involved in this inquiry alone, thinking about this. I mean, the master leases, I mean, you're not likely to sign a lease for a flat if you can't control who else might, would you sign a lease if you thought 4 others might be living with you?
No, indeed not.
No, I don't mean, I mean, commercially, unless collectively Amazon, Netflix and Disney have very peculiar lawyers, it is a fair inference that their master lease is subject to some kind of first refusal on space, wouldn't you
I
think?
can accept that, yeah.
Yeah, thank you. We then have Warner Brothers, Leavesden. I don't know, have you been to the Harry Potter there?
No,
No. Well, don't, lots of people love Harry Potter. And again, Warner Brothers is effectively an entertainment conglomerate that has various limbs, doesn't it? And again, do you accept the proposition that Warner Brothers will give priority, preference, first say to their own productions?
I can accept that.
Yeah. The same in relation to Sky Studios. That's part of a greater entertainment conglomerate, Comcast, isn't it? Which includes Sky, which obviously we all know about, both the platform here, but also the content producers, Sky, NBC, which you obviously know as an American broadcasting channel, and Universal. Again, that's a conglomerate who have a master lease in relation to Sky Sports. I mean, Sky Studios. Correct?
If you tell me, I don't know.
Well, I just want, you have no counter evidence that that
no,
connection
indeed
is
not.
wrong.
No.
No. So in the Western cluster, as it's so called, do you accept grade, there's evidence from Knight Frank and Mr. Davis that effectively there were 5 grade A studios and that you haven't sought to challenge the utilization or definition of grade A. And I'm not challenging you or criticizing you in any way, but Mr. Davis and Knight Frank both utilize this method of making judgments about the quality of the existing provision.
Mhm.
And can we agree, apart from Shinfield, 4 of the 5 studios in the Western cluster are now subject to what effect to control by certain parties in the entertainment industry?
I can accept that,
Right.
yeah.
So the only grade A studio which is floating, so to speak, is Shinfield in the West London cluster.
Of existing built studios, yes.
There is nothing to say, and it might even be in existence, there's nothing to say it will happen or won't happen, but it is obviously open to Shinfield. One imagines that Shadowbox control the utilization of that space as owners of that facility.
I have no idea.
Yeah, no idea. Well, it would be strange if the owners didn't have some form of control of who they let use the space. Do you accept that proposition?
Yes, I do, yeah.
Next point, it is open commercially to Shinfield at any stage to also sign a master lease, isn't it?
Presume so.
And we know, for example, I mean, both Mr. Davis and Mr. Chodororitz give evidence on the number of subscribers. We know, for example, Netflix, you've seen that. Netflix has 273 million, I'd love it to be billion, but million subscribers, don't they, worldwide? Have you seen the evidence? You haven't commented on it, but the evidence is that the subscription bases of all the providers, Netflix, Paramount Plus, Disney, etc., all have certain numbers of subscribers, and broadly their subscribers are growing, aren't they? You've seen that evidence?
Yes, I have.
Yeah. Now, it is open to Shinfield at any moment, indeed this afternoon, to enter a master lease. There's no, as far as you know, there's nothing in their section 106 or their planning permission that restricts them from entering a commercial arrangement with effectively a commercial entity that would turn that into a provider. I mean, effectively have first say on the space.
I have no knowledge of that.
You have no knowledge. Thank you. Do you also accept factually that Eastbrook in Dagenham is not in the West London cluster?
Yes,
And you also accept that Belfast Harbour is not in the West London cluster?
I do.
From the evidence we've heard, do you accept the proposition that there exists in the market and a preference, I'll put it no higher than that, but there's a preference in the UK film industry for the West London cluster for reasons of staff, location, accessibility, attractiveness? Do you accept that proposition
do.
or not?
Yes.
Thank you. Now, the position is, in the light of what we've looked at in demand, we're now in the UK in terms of grade A spaces in the Western cluster. The only one that's free floating is Shinfield currently, isn't it?
It would appear so.
Yes. And I'm going to put to you that therefore there is inherently a need for getting quantitative, but qualitatively, it is if Shinfield hired out tomorrow all their space, there would no longer be any space in Grade A premises in the Western Cluster, would there, if they signed a master lease?
It's possibly.
Possibly. Well, why, what, possibly, why,
Well,
definitely?
the only I would speculate. I'm not a sort of an expert in this
No,
area.
no,
I'm
I know
not pretending to
that.
be, but I would speculate if we know that utilization rates are so low, wouldn't we expect some capacity in the other Grade A to accommodate film production?
So I don't understand. Where are you drawing your evidence of utilization being so low? I haven't seen any evidence from you.
Well, no, Knight Frank have produced that evidence. Deloitte have produced that evidence.
What about utilization?
Yes.
Could I not have voices off from various people? Okay, just tell me what you're relying on to make that contention. What is your evidence you say shows utilization is so low?
I cited two pieces of evidence. The study by Deloitte,
Yep.
CD 903, how the winds have changed, who have
So will you give me the reference, please, Mr. Fannon, that you're relying on?
CD 903.
Yeah, I know that. I
And
know
I've
that.
and
but
I
no,
and in
sorry.
my proof of evidence at 7.6, I've reproduced a graphic from that study.
7
7.6.
Oh, that's your. So that is the basis on which you say utilization is so low, is it?
That's one of them, and the other one is in relation to the Knight Franks analysis,
Yeah.
which I've referred to earlier, where they have established, if you like, a sort of a metric for projecting space demand based on a figure of 712,000 square feet, which represents full utilization of the existing stock. And given what the known spend by their figures, we can establish that utilization is at 42.6%.
That's well. Let's spend a moment on that. There is no evidence from any of the studios themselves about their current utilization rates.
No,
is there?
I don't know. I don't
No.
know.
Right. There's also, let's spend a moment. You've got me. There is no. Let's just. You were the officer from the very beginning of this application, were you?
Shortly, not the very beginning. It had been validated and was running for a couple of months before I got involved.
Can I just ask? Has any studio submitted an objection to the proposal?
No,
No. Has any studio submitted an objection to the appeal?
no. not
Has
that
any
I'm aware of.
studio said its utilization rates are making viability difficult?
No.
Right, next point then. Can we also look? Yes, so we've agreed before the break about obviously the future, and we've also looked at the existing. And I just want to spend a moment about current major expansion proposals, because both you and Mr. Kershaw make this point about the pipeline, and the pipeline is a reflection of demand and supply. Do you accept from the evidence that's before this inquiry, and we'll hear detailed evidence on this next week, that you can't make the correlation because people are pausing plans? The inference can be drawn that effectively there's oversupply. There might be a myriad of reasons why sites are not coming forward. Do you accept that proposition?
Yes, I do, yes.
Yeah. I mean, for example, what's happened with High Wycombe that you know?
I'm not familiar with the details.
No, I'm not
there.
expecting you, but what do you know about why High Wycombe will not be developed or not continue or will not be developed?
It's simply that it's not viable.
Okay. And have you ever seen a viability report? Have you seen the circumstances of the owners as to why they're
No, I haven't.
no? Next point, Denham. Denham's in a Bucks application, is it?
I believe so, yes.
Yes, you believe so. Do you know what's happened there? Why, effectively, from my table in my opening, there was an outline application 23 detailed in 24. You've got no evidence as have you about what the current status of Denham is?
I don't.
No. Pinewood. Pinewood, we know Pinewood have got another permission that's currently sitting there.
Indeed.
Yeah. Okay. I'll discuss that a bit with Mr. Kershaw as he gives us. We've also got in relation to Hollyport, what we do know is that Hollyport have spent the money on an appeal last November that's currently sitting before the Secretary of State, haven't they?
Yes.
And the same Sky Studios. I mean, again, let me just take a moment for this, please. Could you take up the LSH report and go the December 24, go to page 5, please.
The 2024 report.
Yes, please.
And page 5.
Page 5, please.
Yep. And there.
Right. Let's just, as far as you know, and you might not know the answer to this, but a total potential supply nationally, we can see two things. Firstly, it's narrowed. The position, there is less potential supply than two and a bit years ago, isn't there? It's gone from 8.5 to 8.2.
Yes.
We also know the total supply in the southeast has narrowed from 7 million to 5.5.
The pipeline, yes.
Yes. Yeah. The pipeline includes everything, doesn't it? Apple in someone's eye, press conference, we're going to developer studios to effectively an outline consent or a full consent. The pipeline is the maximum possible figure, isn't it?
Sorry, I'm not actually sure about that. I think some people distinguish between existing supply and pipeline.
Yeah, exactly. But I'm asking you, what, in your knowledge, if you don't know the answer, but I'm putting to you because of the nature of the figures and the other evidence that 8.2 million square feet is the maximum identified. So it goes from press conference all the way to actually a consent existing or even actually construction on a site.
I'm not sure. Actually.
Okay, that's very fair. Then we note also that in the southeast that the position, and to a degree this is because some of it unquestionably has been built out, but again, the potential supply, if you Russian doll, the national figure to the southeast, again, a reduction of 1.5 million square feet.
Yes, that's what the figures say. Yeah.
And then we also know stage space and construction, and therefore extremely like to be delivered, 305,000 square feet. And stage space more advanced than Marlow, we've got an increase to 1.4. But that figure is actually wrong, isn't it, to be honest, because I'm going to put you. It says, in terms of pipeline sites, we identify the following are more advanced than Marlow Film Studios. And do you see one of the 4 bullet points, Sky Studios Phase 2?
Mm-hmm.
Now, unless I misunderstand that, as you can see from my table at my opening on page ID 1, item 10 is Sky Studios. That's a proposal for 10 sound studios, 225,000 square feet, as I understand it. The appeal is lodged in inquiry March 25. So unless I've gone completely crazy, we're the 30th of January. It's not more advanced, is it? So it's a tiny point, but it's 6 weeks behind us.
I'm not in a position to contradict you.
Okay, so in terms of the future expansion, Denham, can we agree from my page 26? We don't know about Denham. Is that fair? You have no evidence as whether Denham is happening or isn't happening.
I don't know.
Hollyport is subject to the vagaries of the appeal system. It's currently exactly the same as this proposal.
Indeed.
Sky Studios Elstree is also subject to exactly the same process. Do you have an update on Sunset Studios?
No.
Okay. Do you have any information on Sunset Studios?
No.
Okay. So I'm putting to you in terms of of course, we must also consider the Pinewood 3, if I may put it. But I'm going to put to you that, frankly, out of those, all those, including Marlow, there is no certainty at all about Grade A pipeline, is there?
I would defer to Knight Frank's analysis of what they believe is well placed to come forward.
Can I go back to the question though, in terms of what can you say with certainty to the Secretary of State will actually be used for films in the light of the evidential matrix we've just been through?
I don't have any expertise or certainty on that myself.
Okay, thank you. So when we marry the two together and the exercise we did, we agreed, and remember the 3 factors we looked at with Lambert Smith Hampton in a world in their December report of where we have optimism about the future, optimism about 25, an increased share of global production. It can be noted that your position is you accept that there is no certainty about any new Grade A floor space in the that you can say will come forward.
No, I can't say that.
Yeah. Now, and that situation I'm putting to you, Mr. Fannon, and again, remember where we started and we'll end on this topic. When you look at make provision for, it would be in accordance with the MPPF and the guidance. In the light of the demand and the support for cultural industries, it would be correct to take a precautionary principle and make sure there's as much land as possible to ensure Britain has the climate to create effectively growth in a sector which was one of its strengths.
No, I wouldn't agree with that. No, you wouldn't make as much land as possible available at any cost.
Well, we have a position. Can we go back? Can you take up the local plan, please? CD, is it 4 point? CD 4.1, my memory's serving me right.
Where shall I go?
Sorry?
Where do you want me to
I
go?
would like you to go to the effectively the vision and strategic objectives. Yes, page 33. Thank you, Mr. Fraser. I don't know whether you added this flourish. Can we see the big challenge? Maybe this is one of the amendments Mr. Bird told the council to come. Okay. The big. Okay. You see, let's see how this chimes and the development plan, page 33, our vision and strategic objectives. The big challenge, 3.1. Wickham District is ambitious and hopeful about the future. Is that still true? Can one substitute Wickham District for Bucks Council?
Yes, yes.
Yep. The Sustainable Community Strategy for Wickham District sets out the following vision, which also applies to this plan and the council's corporate plan. Wickham District, economically strong and the place to live, work and visit. Is that vision for Wickham District relevant for Bucks Council in January 2025? Is that up to date in your view?
Yes, it is.
And then we look at the 8 strategic objectives of this council, number 3 is to foster economic growth, isn't it?
It is.
And when we spend a moment looking at that, we notice little 3 on page 35. To foster the economic strength of the M40 and the A404 location and that of the rural economy. And we note, this is interesting, isn't it, in the light of events at the end of last week, and I'm not going to ask you about landscaping, but we note the location of the district at the M40, A404 and on the Birmingham Children line is favourable for economic development. However, our challenging topography means that we have a very limited supply of flat land for commercial development. Mr. Fannon, as a planner, the site is situated in what is termed in the development plan as a part of a very limited supply of flat land, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah. And I'm going to put you, frankly, overall, when you see what the NPPF say and what the council are trying to do, when to summarise on need, rather than say no proven need, the injunction in policy terms, in the light of what we've seen over the course of the past hour and a half, is to be positive and embracing of a growth agenda, particularly for creative industries, isn't it?
It is, yes.
Thank you. Thank you, Mum. That's my cross-examination of Mr. Fannon. Thank you very much.
Yes, back on. That took 3 clicks. Okay, thanks very much. Any interested parties in support wish to ask questions of Mr. Fannon? No. Okay, thank you. I haven't got any questions for you. You've been answered them all as you've gone through the cross-examination. Anything for
Just a few short points, if
Please.
I may, Madam. So now I want you to go back, please, to paragraph 87A of the MPPF,
Yes.
which is on page 24. And you were asked here in the context of the creative industry, the includes making provision for. See that?
Yes.
Looking at paragraph A, in terms of facilities and infrastructure for which provision should be made, what is the guidance? What is the advice?
Clusters are networks of knowledge and data-driven creative or high technology industries, and for new and expanded or upgraded facilities and infrastructure that are needed to support the growth of these industries, including data centres and grid connections.
And in terms of needed to support growth, what is your conclusion in relation to the appeal proposal?
And that there would be some demonstration, some evidence that there was a need, that there was a lack of accommodation to support the growth. And clearly the evidence of the inquiry is otherwise. There is sufficient capacity existing to support growth to the predicted horizon.
Are you satisfied there has been any such demonstration?
I'm satisfied there has not been any such demonstration of need.
Then can you take up core document 9.2, please, which is the Lambeth Smith Hampton December 2024 update, and you were asked about section 2. The demand section. Just get that up.
Section 2, yes.
And you were particularly asked about the sentence in the 3rd paragraph of section 2, which says the forecasts for a bounce back in production in 2024 have not materialised, and the studio occupation and performance UK-wide has been poor. Call that?
Yes.
In terms of the figures in 2022 and 2023, or 2021 and 2022, what was the total UK spend on film and HETV projects for those two?
5.7 and 5.6, 22 and 23, is it? 5.6 and 4 million respectively,
Yeah.
billion.
And 2021?
Was 5.7. So-
And in terms of your analysis that you've set out and explained in the Deloitte analysis in terms of studio space utilisation, what does that show?
It shows a marked decline in spend, and that clearly hasn't recovered by 2024. And the Deloitte evidence estimates that capacity utilisation in London and South East will be around 50% in the near future.
And in terms of increase in space, soundstage space, what was the position in the period over the years 2021 and 2022 in terms of new provision?
There was very significant additional provision that clearly outstripped production spend over those years.
And in this context, you were also asked a little later about grade A studios and the availability of grade A studios, and you were asked about Shinfield. Can you take up Mr. Davis's proof of evidence, please? It's the main proof this time, please, and go to page 42.
And there.
It was put to you and you agreed that the studios themselves have not identified or set out their surplus capacity. But in terms of Shinfield, what's the evidence of Mr. Davis as to the position and their vacancy?
Well, I think Shinfield is recognised as grade A facility and largely vacant or available for use.
Then you were asked about reasons why the existing pipeline supply might not be coming forward. You were asked about Wickham, touched upon Pinewood, but it was taken no further with you, other than saying you didn't know what the answer was as to why that wasn't coming forward. Can we just go, please, to core document 13.10, which is the oral evidence to the House of Commons. Committee on Film and High-End Television.
Give me that reference again.
I think, Madam, it should be 13.10.
Yes. And there.
Could you go within that to page 28, PDF page 28? At the very bottom of the page.
Because I don't have page numbers, can you give me a question number under?
Have you got the PDF?
243, yes.
28? It's under question 243.
Yeah.
That's the bottom of the first page dealing with responses there. There's a Mr. Andrew M. Smith quoted.
Yeah.
Who is he? Do you know who he is?
Yeah, I understand. He's a chief executive of Pinewood Group.
Yeah. Look at the bottom paragraph. What explanation is given to
So Mr. Smith,
in relation to their consent for further stages?
So Mr. Smith is giving evidence to the Culture, Media and Sports Parliamentary Select Committee. He says we have planning permission at Pinewood to build another 25 stages. We're going to adopt a very cautious approach to that development because we want to see where the demand is going. But we certainly have sufficient facilities throughout the UK and many more are coming on stream.
What conclusions would you draw from that?
That there's no need for additional grade A space or otherwise in the UK or the London and the South East at present.
And there's a bit of noise off. I wonder if that could be slightly distracting.
Please, can you be quiet in the audience? Thank you.
Then I think just the final point, please. You were asked about the pipeline supply and the prospects of that coming forward. Can we just go back to the Knight Frank report, please, and page 58. And paragraph 3.3.17.
What with a PDF? Oh, you're not.
Sorry, I cannot.
Just give me that paragraph.
It's paragraph 3.3.17, just beneath table 10, and it's page 58.
Yeah, 105.
105. Thank you, Mr. Fraser.
317, yes.
Do you have there?
1 second. Sorry. Yes, I'm there now.
What is their judgment as to the prospects of the 1.3 million square feet, which you referred to in your evidence and chief coming for?
So that based on their evaluation, the 1.3 million square feet estate space has a reasonable prospect of being delivered. This includes approximately 1.1 million from proposals that have already received planning permission, as well as one other scheme that is well positioned to do so, given its location, finance backing, application stage.
Thank you very much. Madam, those are my questions. Thank you very much. That's Mr. Fannon's evidence on the need matter.
Thank you very much. Okay, we will adjourn for lunch now then. So we'll take an hour. Is that does everyone need an hour or a bit longer? Anybody need a bit longer or
An hour is sufficient.
an hour's fine? That fine with you, an hour?
That's fine, ma'am. I think just the usual arrangements of jiggling things
Swapping.
around. Yeah.
Yeah. Now you've said, or Mr. Kershaw said 2 hours and 15 minutes for examination in chief. Is that still the case? Because that's quite a long examination in chief.
I absolutely appreciate that looks long. I think I will be coming in around the 2 hour mark. And the reason why is, of course, Mr. Kershaw's evidence is trying to deal with the evidence of 5 need witnesses. I suppose when one were to look at the exercise of adding up how much time in chief for those 5, Mr. Kershaw, it is proportionate, I guess, when one looks at it that way. But just to explain the 2 hours is just a lot of ground to cover. But I think, yeah, I suppose 2:15 was for that bit of wiggle room, but I do think 2 hours is realistic.
Okay. Okay, understood. You've estimated 1 to 2 hours. Who's doing the cross?
I am.
You are.
I wouldn't miss it for the world. So I'm going to be.
You're
yeah.
Mr. Fraser.
But I am. I mean, I
You're
am. My
Probably going to
time
be at
is
least
not-
2 hours, aren't you then?
Sorry.
You're probably going to be at least 2 hours, I imagine. If
No,
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 okay.
no. Well, I'm only concerned with a 2 hour examination chief. Obviously, the time estimate's based. I mean, Mr. Kershaw did have a rebuttal, so he has had time to see it, all our evidence. He's produced a rebuttal. So my learned friend's point about there are 5 witnesses, frankly, he's addressed them in the rebuttal.
Right. We'll see how we go on. Okay, so we'll come back at 1:30 and we're adjourned for lunch. Thank you.